Hey guys, what's going on? It's Daniel. Welcome back to my channel, Tech Tuning. In today's video, I'm going to be doing some of the suspension work on the Celica. There's been a lot going on, as you can probably tell from the weekly posts that I've been doing, because I've had a lot of footage building up. The issue is just that the footage was behind everything that was actually happening on the car. So a lot of what you guys are watching now happened a long time ago, and I'm just finally getting to editing it all. The suspension work that I am tackling today is going to be finally putting in the rear short stroke shocks for the car. As you guys saw a long time ago, I put in those Eibach lowering springs, which have dropped the back of the car a lot. And I've already talked about my plans to do the ground control front coilover conversion, which will help level out the suspension. But that's going to be a big project, which I'm waiting for the weather to get a little bit warmer before I dive into that. So in the meantime, while the weather is still a little bit cold, what I wanted to do was just do anything that I can do. So, since I've already gotten these rear short stroke shocks, I'm going to put those in because it should be a pretty easy job from what I can tell. All I really have to do is just empty out all the parts that I have in the back of the car right now. Since it's really been sitting for a while, I haven't been able to drive it that much. I've just been throwing all the parts into the trunk since I have nowhere else to put them. So we'll empty out the trunk, and then I just have to get access to the top of the shock towers. And then all we have to do is lift up the back, and if we take off the wheels, it should be as easy as just unbolting the lower shock and then unbolting it from the top and just sliding out the old stuff and putting in the new stuff. The shocks that we will be installing are actually not Celica ones because of the fact that they're a short stroke one. What I bought was just regular KYB XLGs, so they're basically an OEM performance style shock. However, these are from a 1982 to 2002 Camaro. They were only about $70. I got them on eBay, and I'll try to throw a link down in the description if you guys are interested in doing the same. The difference between these and the OEM shock and why I'm putting this in is because of the fact that it's lower now. The original rear spring was about 14.5 inches long. Now that we have the lowering springs in, which are only about 9.5 inches long, we need to get a shorter shock. Because we have a shorter spring in the back, but we're still using a full length shock, we're essentially loading the shock up before we even have any suspension travel. Now what we're going to do is take the original shock, which was 25 inches long, and we're going to replace it with these Camaro shocks, which are 20 inches long. Therefore, we reduce it by 5 inches again to keep the ratio the same. In the end, what this should do is help create a little bit better suspension feel in the car. We're also going to be putting in new shocks, so it should feel a lot better anyway, because I'm pretty sure one of mine is blown. And all in all, this is hopefully going to fix a lot of little issues that I have on the car right now. For starters, this should replace the blown shock, which I just mentioned, because my car is currently sitting a little bit to the side, which I talked about in my suspension bug issue video. So fingers crossed that this takes care of that too. Because the springs are too small for the shocks in there, I have a little bit of creaking depending on when I'm driving and what bumps I hit. So this should pull everything together and keep it tightly in place. And I do also have new spring insulators, which I'm going to be replacing those as well because mine are dried and worn out. And putting those in should also help quiet down the car a bit. But that's enough talking. Let's empty out the trunk of all these parts we have and let's get to work. With everything out of the trunk, I can show you guys the top of the rear shock towers, which is where we'll have to do some work. You can see we have one right here, and then on the other side we have the other right here, but this one still has this factory little cap on it. So what I'm pretty sure we're gonna have to do is either remove some of these interior panels or try and pop this out to get access to it. Okay, thankfully, as you guys saw, that was easy enough. This just pops right out. I think it's actually supposed to just clip onto the top, but mine had, I guess, fallen down below, probably because the material is all worn out. There's not one for the driver's side, so we should be able to just go ahead, lift up the car, and get to work now. So in terms of what we need to do this, here's everything that we're looking at. We have the shocks, like I mentioned before, and the part number for those. And then we have the insulators, which I have both the tops and the bottoms for both passenger and driver's side. This is going to be the part number for the top insulator piece. And then this is going to be the part number for the bottom insulator. And the only tools that we're going to need to get this done is going to be 14mm sockets and a ratchet, and then something to take your wheels off. What makes these so good is that they're basically a direct bolt up. So this should just slip over our original bottom piece on the lower control arm, and these should just bolt up to the top, and we have new bushings for that as well. So fingers crossed, all in all, this is going to make the car feel a lot better. The way I want to approach this is by first taking off the wheel, then taking off the lower connection of the shock, and then what I'm going to do is disconnect the top. So with the wheel off, here's what we're looking at. My lower spring insulators, as you can see, are completely done for. What I'm going to do for now is just replace them with the new ones, which should give us no problem. And later on, when I have more time and the weather's a little nicer, I'm going to go back and I'm going to get rid of this surface rust that's formed, and I'm going to repaint over that to keep it from rusting in the future. To get this out, same as we put the lowering springs in, 14mm bump stop right here. To disconnect our lower shock is going to be another 14mm right here. We'll disconnect that, and then we'll go back up into the trunk and we'll disconnect it from up there as well. So yeah, this is definitely no good anymore. They were fine with the original spring in there because the original spring held them very firmly in place. The issue was when I put the lowering springs in and I was still using these OEM shocks, there was too much room for this spring to move around, and that was what caused these to just get shredded up over time. So yeah, like I said, we'll come back to this and restoring this at a later point. The tops aren't so bad. They're definitely getting to the point that they need to be replaced, but nowhere near as bad as the bottoms. Either way, while we're here for the time being, I'm going to swap them out, and then we'll come back to this when we have more time. Alright, our new insulators are in, and our bump stop is back in. I'm going to take the camera up into the trunk, and we're going to disconnect this from the top of the shock tower. Okay, so as you guys just saw, what's good to note is that I didn't know these top of the shocks actually use like a locking nut method. So there was two nuts that were put on the top of the shock that were threaded backed up against each other. What I found to work really good was to just hold one in place with a wrench and then hit it with some sort of power tool because it was a little too difficult with hand tools. And then I just used the power tool to take the second one off. So we've got that off, we've got the bushings out, and now we should be able to drop the shock. So with both shocks out lined up next to each other, we can see the difference in length now. But what's good about these Camaro shocks is that they use the same bottom and top connectors, so that's why they're pretty much a direct swap as long as you're using a lowering spring on the car. What's interesting to see is that these are actually the OEM shocks. You can see that they've even got the Toyota stamping on them still. And this one does seem to be in pretty good shape. If you compress it, it still has enough return. The bushings weren't in that bad of shape either, which is actually pretty good. But yeah, now that we have that out, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the bushings that came with our Camaro shock. And what's included with the Camaro shock is essentially exactly what we just took off of the Toyota one. So we're going to have one bushing for the top, which goes inside at the top of the shock tower. And then we have another bushing, which is going to go underneath inside the shock tower. So something that's really interesting to note is that the OEM Toyota one has 3 of these washers. There's actually one that goes inside the shock tower underneath the inside bushing, and then there's 2 which sandwich the top bushing, which is actually on top of the shock tower in the interior. Let me put it all together so I can give you guys an idea of exactly what I'm talking about. So here is the OEM Toyota shock exactly as it was. There's one metal piece at the bottom. There's the bushing, which is inside the shock tower. So in the wheel well, this bushing is there. Then it goes through the body, and then there's one more tab right here, and then there's the inside bushing, which is in the interior, then the top metal piece, and then there's the 2 nuts that were holding it all down. So what I'm interested in is the fact that the new Camaro ones, obviously since it's not the same car, came with 2. I'm thinking what the smartest thing to do is just going to be to use the new Camaro bushings but reuse these old Toyota pieces so that I can still have 3 when I put it back together. So on our Camaro shock, here's what we're looking at. I've got the lower washer, the new bushing, we're going to put it into the car, and then we have this little 3 sandwich with the new bushing that's going to be going on top of it to bolt it all together. So let's get back to putting this right back in. Okay, our new shock is bolted up to the top. What we're gonna have to do now, which I think might be the difficult part, is gonna be lifting this lower control arm in order to slot this back on. Alright, and just like that, as you guys can see, we have it all put together. Now you can already notice right away that the actual wheel hub is sitting way higher up than it was before. This is because the shock was what allows it to droop. And that was why the spring was always loose whenever we would take our suspension apart. But now that it's put back together, we should be doing it at the correct geometry. As you saw, I did have to use the jack to get the control arm up. I lifted it from this point right here, and I had this little rubber adapter to make sure I didn't crush anything. And once I did that, I was able to fit our new shock bottom on and tighten it all up. So this is where we're at. I'm gonna repeat this on the other side, and then we should be able to put the car down and we can see how it is. Alrighty guys, that is gonna wrap up this installation. Like I was talking about, the short stroke shocks are really good when you're using the lowering springs, and I've driven the car around for a little bit now since installing it, and it's honestly made a huge difference. Like before, I would back out of my driveway and I would hear like clunking because the spring had too much room to move around. Now it's so quiet and it rides really good, even though they're just regular quality shocks. Like the KYB is just an OEM replacement. The suspension geometry is so much better off with this, and it's got me even more excited to do that front coilover conversion. So I hope you guys stick around to see that. Thank you as always for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out.